Okay, first up the narrative, and I think it's easily one of its strongest aspects, and it's a hell of a lot smarter than its edgy box art would have you believe. So you play a guy named Torque, and he isn't some highly trained STARS operative or a concerned father looking for his daughter in some foggy town. Torque is actually a hardened inmate who has been sent to death row. But why is he on a death row? Because he's been convicted of murdering his ex-wife and his 2 kids. And the catch? He suffers from these severe blackouts and has absolutely no memory of even committing the crime. So right off the bat, the game drops you into your cell, and before you can even get comfortable, an earthquake rocks the entire facility. The power goes out, the screams start, and the prison is suddenly overrun by these grotesque creatures. They immediately start killing every living thing in sight, guards, inmates, it doesn't matter. So your cell door gets busted open during the chaos, and your only objective is to escape the island alive. But the suffering isn't just a straightforward prison break story. Oh no, it's actually a psychological descent into hell. Cause like the prison is located on this carnate island, and this place is basically a sponge that has been soaking up human misery for centuries. And the island's history is a masterclass in environmental storytelling. Like as you fight your way out, you aren't just exploring a prison, you're walking over the atrocities of history. Like you'll find the remains of a Puritan settlement where innocent people were burned as witches, a crashed ship from the transatlantic slave trade, a crumbling 1920s insane asylum, and a World War II military installation. The game makes it very clear that the monsters weren't brought here by some external curse. The island itself is actually sick, and that earthquake just opened up the ground and let the sickness out.
Precision. And unlike standard medical procedures, with a lethal injection you have a patient who probably does not want the procedure to occur. Therefore...
So, as you navigate this nightmare, you're constantly haunted by the voices in his head. You hear his dead wife begging him to be a good man, while some sinister voice constantly urges him to embrace the violence and kill everyone. And if that wasn't enough, you're also guided and taunted by these 3 distinct ghosts who kinda like represent the long-term psychological damage of the institutional system. First, there's Dr. Killjoy, a mad psychiatrist who used to run the island's asylum back in the 1920s. Then you have Horace P. Gage, an inmate who was executed in the electric chair. Horace was so consumed by the paranoia and isolation of prison life that he went insane and killed his own wife during a conjugal visit, genuinely believing it was the only way to protect her from the evil of the island. He appears as a spirit of pure electricity and tries to help Torque find his decency. And finally, there's Hermes T. Haight, and this guy is an absolute piece of shit, to be honest. He was actually the prison's executioner for decades and took immense pleasure in his job before eventually committing suicide in his own gas chamber. So he manifests as a cloud of toxic gas and constantly encourages Torque to give in to his darkest, most violent urges. And the interactions with these ghosts really take the story from a simple splatterfest into a genuinely compelling exploration of institutional trauma and guilt. So moving on to the visuals and the art style, and this is what I believe gives The Suffering its unforgettable identity. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that a PS2 game from 2004 looks technologically mind-blowing today. The character models are chunky, the textures are muddy, and the facial animations are stiff as f***. But what it lacks in polygon count, it makes up for with some amazing artistic vision. The environments are oppressive, gritty, and coated in this layer of grime that makes you feel like you need a tetanus shot just from looking at it too much. And also for me, the monster designs here are top tier. These things aren't just some random spooky demons. Every single enemy type is a physical manifestation of a specific method of execution or a historical tragedy that took place on the island. It's a level of symbolic design that honestly gives Silent Hill a run for its money, but instead of being abstract and deeply personal, these monsters are blunt and completely in your face. The most common enemies you face are the Slayers, which represent execution by decapitation. These things are terrifying. Like their actual heads are completely severed from their necks, held floating in place by these rusted metal contraptions bolted to their shoulders. Then you have the Marksmen, representing execution by a firing squad. And then there are the mainliners, who are arguably the most disturbing. There are also the Noosemen, the Burrowers, the Festers, and the Infernas. The enemy design here is just edgy 2000s brilliance, and one of my favorite little details is that when they aren't trying to rip your face off, they will actually fight each other, showing that their rage is completely blind and indiscriminate. Another visual touch that I love is the blood mechanic. As you play, you're gonna be getting up close and personal with these monsters. And the more enemies you kill, the more Torque physically gets coated in their blood and guts. So like when you get into a massive firefight, by the time the dust settles, Torque is literally painted red from head to toe. The blood slowly fades away over time, but because the pacing is so relentless, you spend about 90% of the game looking like you just took a bath in a slaughterhouse. It's a simple effect really, but it adds so much to the brutal atmosphere of the game. Okay, next up the gameplay, and this is where I feel it really tried to carve out its own niche. Cause like if you came into this expecting methodical inventory management of Resident Evil, you're in the wrong place. It's an action horror hybrid and it leans heavily on the action. You aren't slowly backing away from zombies while counting your pistol rounds. In fact, you're quite literally sprinting through hallways, dual-wielding revolvers and blowing demons back to hell. And one of its coolest features is that you can play the entire game in either third person or first person. This is incredibly useful because the third person view is great for spatial awareness, but the first person view lets you aim much more precisely when you're trying to pick off a marksman across a courtyard. And yes, the controls have that slight jankiness typical of early PS2 era shooters, but it's surprisingly responsive and feels really good once you get the hang of it. And your weapons arsenal is exactly what you would want in a prison riot scenario. You start with a trusty shiv but quickly upgrade to some heavy hitters like the fire axe, which is an absolute godsend. You then eventually get dual revolvers, a pump-action shotgun, a Tommy gun for crowd control flashbangs, TNT, and even a flamethrower. And if you're crazy enough to find the secret areas or use cheat codes, you can unlock the Gonzo gun, which is literally a rubber chicken that fires explosive eggs. Anyways, the game also gives you plenty of ammo, basically encouraging you to stay on the offensive rather than running away. But for me, the pinnacle of the combat loop is the insanity meter. So, as you blast your way through enemies, the meter starts to fill up. And once it starts flashing, you press a button to let Torque completely lose his mind. He physically transforms into this terrifying monster with huge claws. And in this state, you're an absolute wrecking ball. Like you can grab enemies, rip them in half, perform brutal execution combos, and just like clear a room in seconds. And the more you kill in this form, the more powerful this beast becomes. But there's a huge catch. While you're in this monster form, your health constantly drains. And if you don't manually transform back into human before your health hits zero, you actually die. It adds this fantastic risk-reward tension to the fights. And you also have to be careful because the whole transformation animation takes a second or two and you're like totally vulnerable to getting smacked while you're morphing. Now beyond the shooting and the monster morphing, the most important mechanic in the game is the morality system. So the game tracks your choices and it's entirely based on how you treat the other humans you encounter. Throughout the game you'll run into guards who are trapped or inmates who are terrified out of their minds. So you basically have three choices. You can be a good guy and help, you can be an evil bastard and kill them, or you can stay neutral and just walk past them. And the game forces you to make these choices in really messed up situations. For example, early on, you find the execution room. There's an inmate strapped to the electric chair. You can walk over to the controls and fry the guy for some evil points, or you can just leave the room for neutral points. But there's no good choice there. Later, you find a guard who has had all his limbs chopped off by the monsters and is slowly bleeding to death. You can shoot him to end his misery for good points, or leave him to suffer for neutral points. And the game tracks these actions, which then changes Torque's physical appearance. So if you play as a saint, Torque looks relatively clean and human, and the picture of his family in his inventory stays pristine. And if you play as a psychopath, Torque starts to look sick and monstrous, and his family photo becomes dirty and covered in blood. And this morality system isn't just a gimmick, it's actually tied directly to the narrative. So there are these three distinct endings and they completely change the context of the entire game. If you get the good ending, it turns out Torque was a decent guy. The ending reveals that he was framed by a criminal organization and some thugs broke into his house and murdered his family while he was incapacitated. And if you take the evil path, the ending reveals that Torque really is a cold-blooded psychopath. You get a flashback showing him brutally killing his wife and kids because he felt they were holding him back. But the neutral ending is widely considered the best and the most satisfying conclusion. Now the game reveals a deeply grounded tragic truth. There was no supernatural interference and there were no mob hitmen. Torque and his wife got into a heated domestic dispute, and in a moment of blinding rage, Torque accidentally struck her, killing her. His teenage son witnessed this, had a complete psychological breakdown, then drowned his younger brother in the bathtub and then jumped out a window. It's a devastatingly real depiction of domestic violence and the cycle of trauma, and it hits way harder than any of the supernatural stuff.
I got a friend at the DA's office. Says the prosecutor on your case is being indicted. Says you probably get a new trial. Guess it's your lucky day, huh?
So the whole game is a relatively tight experience. If you're exploring every nook and cranny, reading the notes and taking your time, you're looking at roughly a 6 to 8 hour playthrough. Honestly, I think that's the perfect length for a game like this. It doesn't overstay its welcome and the pacing keeps you moving constantly. There's like very little filler here and you're almost always engaging in some kind of high stakes fight. However, we need to talk about the difficulty because this is where the game has some serious rough edges. Like for the first 2/3 of the game, the difficulty is pretty well balanced. If you play smart, use your heavy weapons on the big guys and pop your pills when your health gets low, you'll be fine. But the last couple of chapters in this game are absolute bullshit. It goes from a challenging horror shooter to a tedious exercise in frustration. The game just starts throwing armies of the most annoying enemy types at you in these small arenas. They also introduce these new fire enemies that just set the whole room ablaze, and you end up spending half your time rolling around on the floor while getting hacked to pieces. There's also this significant issue with getting knocked down. Some enemies, especially the slayers, can knock you flat on your ass. And when you're like swarmed by 5 of them, you can end up in this infuriating loop where you stand up, instantly get hit and fall back down. And don't even get me started on the escort missions. Cause if you're going for the good ending, you have to keep certain NPCs alive. And these guys are dumber than a bag of rocks. They will frequently get stuck, stand out in the open during a fight, or literally trap themselves behind a door, ruining your chances of getting those good karma points. The final boss fight is also a bit of a letdown, relying more on trial and error mechanics than actually testing the combat skills you have built up over the game. Look, in a world where we are desperately clinging to nostalgia and remaking every horror game, the suffering is screaming for a comeback. It's a game that respects your time, challenges your morals, and lets you blow the head off a demon with a pump-action shotgun. It's dark, it's gory, and it's fun where it matters the most. It's an absolute tragedy what happened to this franchise. Like a few years ago, you could easily buy these games on GOG, but they ended up getting delisted. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know in the comments if you ever played this back in the day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.